All right. So we're in here. This is Trump and the GE. Gets bad and bougie. I'm Shock Exchange, and I'm here with Mr. Mitchell, of course. And there's a firestorm over a new book called Bad and Bougie and Trap Feminism, which we'll discuss sort of more from an artistic standpoint, what it says about the media, what it says about the art world. But we're in the art world, and I think some of the themes that's coming out of this firestorm affects Trump and the GE directly. But first, we'll talk about the economy. Um, Again, inflation is still high, partly due to maybe coming out of the pandemic, and also partly due to supply chain issues dealing with the war with Russia and Ukraine. Because the U.S. is talking about has actually cut back purchases of oil from Russia. That's driven up oil prices, and then that's going to create a if it hasn't already, create a backlash from Russia and potentially China about not supplying certain um, material to the United States, which means that it could cause a hiccup for supply chains and cause supply disruptions and cause volatility in prices for certain goods and services and certain materials that goes into these supply chains. So at the end of the day, the short term there's going to be a lot of inflation for whether it's food or computer chips or what have you. That's going to affect all Americans as the economy still is sort of in a state of flux. Seems like President Biden really wants to punish Russia, but again, like we talked about earlier, I'm not sure that the United States is in the best position to have an economic war. I don't think so. I'm not sure Russia or China are either, but they're much. I think they're in as good a position or better than the United States. And there's some theories that China, which has shut down several cities to stop a rise of COVID, seems that China may be doing it on purpose, shutting down their economy, which is going to hurt our economy because I think we're in the worst position to affect to take a hit to our economy. We're in the worst position to suffer from stagflation, which is a rising unemployment, and also rising costs. So that's where we're headed. And some people think that China is doing it on purpose to punish the United States. So if they shut down the economy, they buy less from the U.S. It's going to affect our economy, which is pretty much the case. I think it's going to be a lot of question marks as long as the war with Russia and Ukraine goes on. War is not good for anybody, but I just don't. I think it was in my opinion, it was probably a knee-jerk reaction to stop buying oil from Russia and to pull all these companies out of Russia because now Russia is probably going to pull back from buying goods and services from the U.S. as well as China, and then China is buying, oil, like Russia's one of its most important products, oil. They're buying it with the Chinese currency, and Russia's asking other countries to buy in rubles. So that means less demand for the dollar. So that's going to affect the dollar as well. So that's pretty much my take on the economy. I know the Fed's hiking interest rates. I would say they're normalizing rates, which they should have done. They should have done years ago, and it's causing a cloud for the stock market, which for the past decade so has been the economy. Stock market gains has driven the economy and not necessarily GDP growth because you really don't know what the true economic output of the economy is because we won't stop the stimulus. Until you stop the stimulus, until you normalize rates, you're not going to really know what the true output of the economy is, and that seems to be the point. I think the presidents have been masking how poor the economy really is. And every time it stalls or whatever, we find an excuse to cut interest rates again or continue stimulus. So that's sort of my take on the economy at a broad level.
Now, the latter point is a really good point, and often goes overlooked because it demands to ask the question and equally answer the question of what is the true value of this economy. And after 14 years of a monetary policy that has continued to prop up assets and the investor class, and also the which are largely the owners of said assets, it makes it increasingly challenging to know, well, what is true market value of the overall economy. Is the in one place that we're seeing some of that retraction and answering that question of value is the housing market. You know, I mean, pretty much every institution from Deutsche to B of A, etc., has been warning of an ever increasing heating up housing market. You know, there's always debate: is it a bubble? Is it not a bubble? Who's purchasing? The Fed put out guidance that that the housing market is heating up, that it is likely a bubble. Yet, in the same breath, is not a bubble. It was very uh, just very dichotomous argument that the Fed was making in his most recent outlook on the housing market. But really, to even take a step back from kind of the 30,000 foot view and really get into brass tacks, where it really impacts people's homes, their ability to make decisions, whether they should buy, whether they should refinance, etc. This is where inflation and an inflationary environment is most impactful. Where we're seeing the Fed fund rate increase, obviously due to, the Fed increasing rates. We've already spoken on the fact that we are now in the highest inflationary environment in over 40 years, 8.5%. What does that mean in practical terms, though? What does that mean to your food costs, your gas costs, and places like LA where gas is already over the $6.50 per gallon mark. Just compared to even the same time last year where it was in the low fours. That's more than an 8.5% increase due to inflation. It's, what is the cost of my bread? What is the cost of my milk? What is it going to cost me for daycare and childcare and other childcare needs? So we're seeing across the board that the basket of goods that the Fed typically looks at to identify what is a national average in terms of markers of increasing goods of services is well beyond an 8.5% mark. In some instances, we're seeing 1,200% markups when we look at the cost of raw materials. We've spoken about the construction industry several times over, which is where even the conversation of Russia and China come into play prior to this inflationary environment. There was already a shortage on semiconductors, already a shortage on aluminum, already a shortage that was heating up the used car market. So, if you are a median income household, even two-person household, and you're bringing in 50K, let's even bump it up another 20K and say as a full household you're bringing in 75,000 dollars for a household. You're hurting. You're struggling. Even if you are remote working, maybe you're saving on some gas as a household, but your utility costs have gone up more than 8.5%, depending on where in the country you are. Some people's utilities have gone up over 20% in a billing period. And even more. Again, so when we look at these numbers from a very high level, they're very disconnected. They're very disjointed to people's everyday lives, what their everyday interactions are, and you're looking at more than 8.5% of increase of your wallet share going out of the window, going to other people's pockets other than your own, and meanwhile, your income has not kept up with the rate of inflation and with the amount of people that have largely left. In fact, I believe it was Gartner. I might be wrong. It was either Gartner or McKinsey that identified that of those 4 million most recent kind of dropouts of the job market or the labor market. About roughly 3 million of those individuals were already low to middle income, and either low education or uneducation, meaning higher education or tertiary education, and I believe something like 60%, or maybe a little more, were women. So that I don't know why, but that piece, kind of that latter piece, surprised me a little bit. Didn't have that on my bingo card. But I thought it was an interesting, an interesting point. Usually, when we see these type of demographics applied, you're looking at Quinnipiac polls, early voter straw polls, and especially within the this the last two election cycles, the emphasis was on that demographic of either low education, like didn't finish college, or didn't attend college, but the emphasis was on men,
Right.
right? So, yeah, you typically don't see that association of low to no education, and women, and certainly leaving the job market, or the labor market, in those type of droves. So, certainly, kind of some food for thought in terms of direction of what may be happening, right, within households, the conversations that may be happening. And that's really that's the real economy. When we talk about the economy, is really the material experiences of people across the socioeconomic stratosphere, not these 50,000 foot views that only affect institutional capital, which is largely, when we talk about the Fed, when we talk about the investor class, that's largely who we're discussing, is the impact on institutions, and policies that kind of trickle down from those institutions' activities. So, the long and short is that, unfortunately, since the last time, I feel like, what do we call it, a broken clock at this point, or spinning
Right.
record.
Yeah, you're right.
But every time we
Twice a
talk
day.
at
Yeah.
this point, it just seems very redundant because
Yeah.
it's like, what's the movement?
Yeah, but the
Right?
the
That
thing
is
the thing
happening.
about oil though is that it goes into so many different products, even in petroleum.
Right.
Petroleum goes into like when you make plastics for the
Yeah. Yep.
for packages. So that
Yep.
means the cost for packaging is going to go up. The
Even
petroleum,
tires,
yeah,
even our
petroleum
tires.
affects, yeah, it affects so many things that you can't. It's not just the gas pump. It affects so many other things that you can't
Exactly.
avoid the prices going up. But it make an interesting point that people always focus on the investor class. What BlackRock or Blackstone or what's the guy Bill Gross? I forgot
Vanguard and
Pimco.
right.
When you actually hear from real people, it's like a shot. It's shot to the gut, like shot to the system. Like when you actually hear what individuals think, it's a shock to the system. Like they don't even talk to individuals anymore.
Right. Right.
Nobody
Right.
asks individuals what they want or what they think. I guess
Right.
you only hear from them when it's a Capitol riot or or every 4 years during an election, right, or during the midterm elections, right. That's the only time
Yeah,
you hear what
that's part
individuals
of the
think,
point.
and everybody
Yeah.
has to guess. You have Rand Jones crying on TV, crying like in my echo. I guess in our echo chamber, we didn't you know in our feeds, we didn't know that you know the guy Glenn Youngkin was going to get elected governor of the state of Virginia. We didn't know that. Do you talk to any people? Only people you talk to are people on CNN or
Exactly.
or network TV. But anyway, so thanks for that. But so the firestorm over a new book called Bad and Boujee Toward a Trap Feminist Theology. And I think of trap, I think of obviously the Migos. And I think of trap music, and I think of a term that's been coined by African Americans, but the lady who wrote the book was white. So her name is Jennifer Buck, and so a lot of people on Twitter were going off, and she had a black lady on the cover, an afro, and I
Yeah.
mean I don't know Jennifer Buck's background, but my first thought was, does she even know anybody who looked like that, or is it just a shock value
Well,
to
she
show?
did say that she's a hip hop dance instructor.
Right, exactly. And it means that you can teach hip hop, but do you go to work and then you go home? Does your students go back to their neighborhood and you go back to your neighborhood? You know what I mean? Did you go to school with any of these people? Did you grow up with any? You know what I mean?
Right.
And it seemed like that was, and what she does now. I don't think she necessarily comes in contact with a lot of African Americans on a regular basis. That's the vibe I get from her. So she did teach that she was a hip hop dance instructor, which I gave her, which I gave, I assume she thought gave her racial bona fides. But but
Yeah.
the people on Twitter were not impressed. It's almost like it was better if she hadn't said it. You know what I mean?
Right,
It's almost like one
right.
of those things where I got two black friends. When someone says that, you know what I mean?
It
Like,
felt that way, right?
right, the way if you have to tell me how many black friends you have, you know what I mean? But anyway,
Exactly.
so the lady on the girl on the cover looked like I wonder if Jennifer Buck even knows this girl or knows somebody who anything about this young lady or anything about this young lady's life. You know what I mean? So
Mm.
that's the first thing that struck me, and people were going off about how dare she write this book and so on and so forth. It reminded me a little bit of the firestorm with Rachel Dolezal, who called herself transracial, and I didn't know
Yeah.
who Rachel Dolezal was, but people on social media kept talking about her, and they made her a trending topic. She ended up going on network TV. I can't get on ABC, but Rachel Dolezal, and I'm black, and Rachel Dolezal can get on network TV for being transracial. She's all on cable TV. She was the talk of the town. She ended up getting a book deal and documentary because people kept making her a trending topic and wouldn't stop talking about her. And I thought this was going to happen with Jennifer Buck. But anyway, so here's a little bit about the firestorm. This is coming from article. It's called "After Publisher Pulls Book by White Professor on Trap Feminism." Founder speaks out. This is from L.A. Times. She said last week the publisher of Bad and Boujee, to want to trap feminist theology, pulled it from distribution after critics raised concerns about the white author's qualifications to write on the book's stated topics of the black experience, hip hop music, ethics, and feminism. Among those critics was author Cecily Bowen, who coined the concept of trap feminism years ago. At its core was how people attempt to celebrate black women without talking about their lived experiences. Things like copying the aesthetics of musicians such as Cardi B and Megan Thee Stallion without giving them attribution or linking it to their lives. And so, let's see. That's what they said about Bowen. Bowen has a master's degree in gender studies from Georgia State University. She understands the process of academic research. She says if Buck had Google trap feminism, her work would have come up. Instead, Buck cited Bowen's work in a footnote in her book. I think the fact that Jennifer Buck does not have the lived experience that makes her the person to write about trap feminism or black feminism is honestly the salt in the wound. Now we're also dealing with issues about cultural appropriation, culture vulturing, and just kind of like cultural voyeurism that is just icky, you know. And another person, I think author Shaniqua Walker Bonds, said that so one of Walker Bonds' first books was published by I think Whiff and Stock Publishers, WIPF, which also published this lady's book. Um,
Mm.
she said that it's not that white scholars can't write about black women, but it has to be done with extreme care, a whole lot of cultural sensitivity and humility, and in relationship with accountability with black women. Walker Barnes wrote on Twitter, and it would probably need a black woman editor. So it's like something as part of this genre of trap feminism. There's certain rules and regulations, I think, amongst the women that's kind of maybe spoken or unspoken that appears. And here's a statement. And I thought it was going to make this lady talk Jennifer Buck a trending topic. And then here comes Pen America, lady by the name of Pen America. The literary agency wrote this piece after the book was removed from circulation. It says some critics argue that Buck, as a white woman, did not have the ability to write a theology that comes from black women's experience. And Pen America issued the following response from Clarice Rosaz, Sharif, senior director of literary programs. When debates over books and authors have a racial dimension, they can get heated quickly because they tap into long histories of exclusion and marginalization of people of color by publishers and other culture-shaping institutions. But Buck's publishers' decision to withdraw a book from circulation is misguided and regrettable. There must be no hard and fast rules about who is entitled to tell certain stories or engage particular topics. Such red lines constrain creative and intellectual freedom, and impair the role of literature and scholarship as catalysts to understanding across differences. So, a lady who just wrote a book, I'm not sure how much publicity it would have gotten had they not tweeted about it. All of a sudden, it's getting almost like a national attention. The LA Times wrote an article about it, which I just mentioned. New York Times wrote an article about it. And so they pulled the book. If they re-release it or re-release it in another form, you basically can make potentially make this book a bestseller just because all the news that's surrounding it, and some of the women who, like Cecily Bowen, so on and so forth, their books, which may have been, she may have coined the term trap feminism, but her book may not have gotten the same publicity. And as we know, the biggest determinant whether someone buys your book is if they know about it. And so apparently, everybody knows a lot about Jennifer Buck. That's sort of where we are. Let you weigh in on that, Mr. Mitchell, about the firestorm
Yeah,
in general.
I saw a little bit of it. I think I was maybe about a few hours short when it hit the Twitter sphere. Um, and my initial reaction was, let me not judge. Let me, let me not give the knee jerk response. Maybe this woman has the kind of the license, so to speak, the authority to write this, because the context that I saw it in was already framing an accusation that, here's this woman exploiting black women, exploiting, I guess what one would argue, kind of a subgenre of black feminism, um, and looking to make some coin off of said exploitation. But it is social media, so sometimes we have to throw on our critical thinking lens and not just jump on the bandwagon with the rest of the crowd. So you know, it was a little hard to see. I did read the back. I read the acknowledgement where she acknowledged her that she is a white woman. She does have privilege. She acknowledged the way that she grew up and essentially centering black women in her work. Um, and I don't know this woman personally at all. Never heard of her. I think like most folks, just woke up and said, okay, well, who is Jennifer Buck? Right? Why are we reading about her? Right? So I can't speak to her true intentions. In other words, I can't say that these words were sincere or insincere. Um, uh, However, it did display a degree of sincerity that I didn't get, that there was necessarily malicious intent. Um, but it is curious as to um, as to why this specific topic, this kind of specific time, why a white woman would kind of dedicate her her education to a rather nuanced degree of feminism. Because to my understanding, the term was only coined what, about 6 or 7 years ago. So, and only one person that has written to any degree of scholarship on that particular topic. So it kind of feels like, she found out about Bitcoin in 2010, right? It's like, oh, well, I want to be on the tip of the tip of the sword,
Right, right,
right? Like,
right,
if I can
right,
be on
right,
the tip of the sword, I think that this is going to be the next big thing. So let me kind of jump on the wave, because
right.
it is curious, right? Like,
Right.
why, like, black feminism is well established. Patricia Hill Collins, Angela Davis, even Kimberly Crenshaw with the rise of intersectionality, kind of a second wave of intersectionality. Even the lesser known, I would argue and say, Africana womanism is even lesser known than trap feminism at this juncture. So in other words, there is such a wide field that she could have tapped into
Right. Right.
with established scholarship that made me take a step back and ask, okay, well, what is the true intention here? Like, even if it's not malicious, but simply not being malicious doesn't remove exploitation.
Right.
Uh,
Right. And so I looked up trap feminism, and Cecily Bowen, I read an excerpt from her book, and I think she's when I saw how she defined trap feminism, it's really black women sort of making it on their own, whether they have to strip, or whether they have to be babysitters, whether they have to work two jobs. Black women going out and getting it on their own and being a bad bitch or what have you. Um, and it's also like what Lizzo, she talks about how she's a bad bitch and so on and so forth. It's
Right,
almost like
right, right, right.
almost like woman empowerment more so, and like how you if you're a woman, you gotta go get it. You gotta get it how you live it, and so on and so forth. That seems like what she's saying about trap feminism. Um, but it's really from a black woman's perspective, not necessarily that you necessarily live in a trap house, but you got to do what you got to do to make it. Having written a book, I know that writing a book is like there's so many books being written now, especially with the internet and self publishing. There's millions of more books being written today than there was 20 years ago. It's almost like going to the Grand Canyon and screaming and hope
Yeah,
someone hears you.
right,
That's what it's like.
right.
And so, uh, what I do know is that, let's say if you are a white author, right, and you write a book about a white genre or white space, the only thing that's going to separate you is whether you have something unique to say and whether or not your writing is next level. Period.
Right.
You don't stand out, but you a white author and you write in a black space, you're in a room with other black authors, you stand out immediately.
You
That's what I
know,
do know. And then also the book industry is about 93% white. That means the authors, the book critics, the distributors, the
the
publishers.
agents, the,
Right,
the
exactly.
managers.
Only thing white in the book industry is the alt right. So you have a bunch of content creators, right, who creating content, but the people who fund the content and promote the content are mostly white. So again, if you're a white author, you immediately stand out if you write about trap feminism and you put a picture of a black lady in an afro on the cover. You immediately stand out, and
It,
they don't stand
yeah,
out. I think it's hard to stand out if you're a white author writing in white spaces. And I think quiet is kept. I think there are white consumers who want to hear about black stories. It's almost a perfect book. Of books that about black stories that are unique, but then a black people benefiting from them.
well,
And
it's I think you make a good point because there's so many historical examples, from Elvis to even Eminem, right? Would these people be considered goats and greats in the same vein if they were not, if the consumers that were buying their goods were not largely white audiences? And let's be very clear, when we look at the numbers, um, you know, the most amount of black people in this country is somewhere between around 38 to 40 million, 40 million folks. Those that by census identify as white, which expands beyond European ancestry. And you even have Hispanics that identify as white, even Middle Eastern folks that identify as white on the census. So, according to the census, the U.S., this might be a controversial statement, but the U.S. is the largest white ethno state on the planet. With about
okay.
240 million folks that identify as white. So, in other words, sometimes we have to look past the emotions of things and look at the cold, hard facts. And numbers allow us to do that with a degree of objectivity. And the fact
But
remains with
on that point though,
a,
the typical book buyer is a upper middle class to wealthy white woman, and that's um
that
when publishers want to sell books or when they think
that's
about a
their target
theme.
demographic.
That's it. Right. Exactly. Exactly.
Right. And
That's what they
that's
have in mind. That's what they have in mind.
right. That's where I was going with it. Even when we look at like, listen, as long as I'm about as I'm a little younger than hip hop. So I can look at hip hop as is a slightly older big brother. Never once, and I've been black all my life, right? And never once have I ever seen anyone pass out when Eminem walked by. Never have I. Frankly, I don't even. I think I've heard an Eminem record played twice in a club before in the entirety of my existence. I've never once heard someone bumping Eminem down the street like, "Oh, throw on that new M." Is he a great lyricist? Sure. I'll leave that debate to the hip hop heads. But my point is this: that how is it that Eminem has outsold Michael Jackson? And I remember the days when Mike could get on TV and people were passing out just from
Right.
seeing Mike on TV. And it's like, so, in other words, when we're talking about record sales, when we're talking about book sales in a hyper competitive environment, like that's the flip side of it. If I'm white and I rap really well, I write really well, I do something really well, but my audience is in a hyper competitive space because there are other folks that do what I do equally well, if not better. So, how do I stand out, in other words, in the space, moving into what is traditionally black spaces? Makes that person stand out. And it makes it even more appealing to non black folks because this is an opportunity to kind of sneak peek into black culture and black life, or essentially culture that is not your own. And it allows you to be voyeuristic without having to engage with that actual community, without having to be a part of that actual community, without having to commit resources to that actual community. In a lot of ways, this is why shows like Blackish have a larger non-black audience than they do black audience. This is including even the Cosby Show. As much as beloved as the Cosby Show is, and especially amongst black households, there were more white households that watched the Cosby Show because it was a sneak peek into another side of black culture that did it in such a way that didn't necessarily racialize the lens. It didn't point a finger at non-black people and make accusations that make folks feel uncomfortable. So
Right.
they
Right.
get, you know what I mean? Like they get
And
to
Bill and Bill
participate.
and Bill Cosby was the perfect person to bring
Oh,
people into the
100%.
house. 'Cause I remember I was working at GE Capital, and we were looking to do a campaign for a marketing campaign for one of our this company that we own, insurance company that we own. Someone recommended that we should get Bill Cosby. It
Mm.
blew me away. It blew me away. Like, why would you pick Bill Cosby?
Right, 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 right.
It came from a white person. I wouldn't have thought Bill Cosby, but they thought Bill Cosby. Like,
Yep.
it's blowing my mind that they felt comfortable with Bill Cosby. But the subject hits home close home to me. 'Cause I wrote a book called Shock Exchange. I didn't say kids from Brooklyn, but the Great Recession and Pain Ahead years ago, and the first three chapters discuss my hometown and some civil rights activity that happened in my hometown. The town I grew up in, Farmville, Virginia, was segregated. I thought the country was black. There was a black school and a white school. Literally a black school and a white school. My high school was like maybe 95% black. It was a white school. The only white school people in the town attended. And they probably had an equal experience. They thought the country was white. The town was segregated.
Right.
One time I saw white people when I went into town. I grew up in the county. And so I read about my parents, most of my, how they closed the school system, Henry Bird in 1950s rather than integrate the school system. And I wrote about it. And a lot of stuff I wrote about that was it was really groundbreaking because people just thought it was about the school closing. I wrote about the period of Reconstruction and how the two kind of coincided. And now they're taking Harry Bird's statue down in the Capitol building. They're also taking his name off of schools and buildings in the state of Virginia. After my book came out, I looked at Harry Bird under a different lens. A white lady from the white school, a few years later, wrote the same story about my black high school she never attended. The lady probably never met a black person her entire life. She didn't go to my high school. Um, Pretty much wrote a very similar story. She's clicked up with the corporate media and the book industry, and they were, one network, one newspaper was saying that she did black folks in Prince Edward County a favor by telling our story for us. It
Wow.
looked like somebody wrote I met some black people on my summer vacation. Like, when you go back to school, you
Right,
say,
right,
what you do
right.
on your summer vacation? That's what it looked like. And so you have a person who never written a book before, never proven they can write that well, never proven anything. Just write a black book, write a story about some black folks, a sheet, and call it research. And it's in every
Right.
newspaper in the country. And so it's a quick way to, you can go into a black space, a quick way to get recognition immediately. If you're in a white space, when you're around white authors, if you're a white person, your writing has to be next level, and you have to have something unique to say. There are some gifted people in the world. There are people who are born to
Right.
write books, black and white.
Right.
Let's be clear. I
Yep.
mean, there are people who gifted, and so my only point is that the opposite may not be true, because if you're black, can you go into a white space and do what Jennifer Buck did? Can you go and write about mountain climbing, even though you never climbed a mountain before, and have someone make you the expert on mountain climbing? You know what I mean? Somebody gonna let you walk
That's
in
an
front.
interesting point,
Are you
man.
gonna be
Like,
able to walk in front of Sir Edmund Hillary? I know. For instance, I read a book by Sir Edmund Hillary, where he tried to climb Mount Everest. He wrote that book so clearly and so vividly. You thought you were actually on that mountain with him.
yeah,
I can go write a book about climbing the mountain. I'm climbing Mount Everest. Never climbed a mountain before. I'm afraid of heights. I don't like cold weather. And someone's gonna prop me up in front of real mountain climbers. Come on.
right.
So the opposite may not necessarily be true. And the message it tells some people is that there's this white lady who's gifted. She can write a story about black folks better than black people can. It's almost laughable.
Yeah, and I think that's even kind of goes to the literary groups,
In
Penn's
America.
response, Penn America's
Right,
response
right, right, right.
about hard and fast rules, right? What is that? What is that? Is there a line? First of all, I think that's kind of the first question. And beyond the social justice activity and the rise of social justice direct actions that we've seen really over the last decade, since 2012, since Trayvon Martin's murder. Um, Beyond that, because a lot of that has pushed these conversations even more so to the forefront. Race in America is a top of mind, front of mind conversation. It always has been. Arguably since the first slave stepped foot uh, in this country. So, that I think that is one of the unique things that folks outside of the U.S. may not realize to the degree. As anyone outside of the U.S. context, certainly that exists outside of even kind of the white black context in terms of communities, may not understand the depth. Oh, what's the big deal? And can easily kind of take a very cavalier approach to it. But the question still begets: are there topics that are off the table if you live in an opposite community? You have not had a lived experience within this particular topic. Where does that leave the biologist, the anthropologist, the historian, right? That has never lived in 1865 to 1895, but that's their period that they cover, right? How many white historians have written in depth, and in fact have contributed to the historical documenting of Black history and culture. All right, even if it's from an academic lens, um, but it still kind of begets that question of it. What is off topic? Or is it simply a result of the process of colonization? That there was a marginalized group of folks that cannot equally step into spaces outside of their own and be able to gain the same recognition in droves the same way, right? I think you always have those outliers like the Clarence Thomases, like the Thomas Souls, who have stepped into traditionally non-black spaces and have been exalted to expert status,
Right.
right? So you always have those kind of outliers, but again, even the pushback on that is a trickle down conversation, meaning that you give a few crumbs to a few folks, and that's often the criticism of capitalism. That's often the criticism of black folks not uh, becoming full citizens, right, with a full citizens' rights, even though they're born and raised in this country and may not even know any other community outside of this country. So there's always pushback, no matter what side of the conversation you stand on. And I think a lot of the points on both sides end up being valid,
Right.
right?
But the thing
And
about
that's the hard part about
these big publishing houses, they're not really in the publishing business. I was told that years ago. They're in the business of making money off
it.
other people. And so, from that perspective,
Interesting. Interesting.
if they can sell Jennifer Buck's, they can sell 1,000,000 units of Jennifer Buck's book on trap feminism to their what they call their, I guess their, I wouldn't say ideal, but in their head, who their consumer is.
Sure,
If they can
sure.
sell 1,000,000 units of her book, and someone can sell, you know, 100,000 of Cecily Bowen's book, the other one is preferable from a monetary standpoint. And it gets
And
into
that,
all these things about people being erased from their own history. You mentioned Little Richard, um, Chuck Berry, all
yeah,
these people pioneers of rock and roll was at a thought. We would think we, as you know, you think we're progressing as a culture. What happened to Little Richard or Rosetta Tharpe, or Chuck Berry, who practically been erased, or Robert Johnson? Because like some of these bands out of the UK, were basically taking his riffs and
yeah,
studying Robert Johnson, studying Muddy Waters, and so on and so forth. And
yep.
they're running off with the back. So you think we progress, but the bottom line is once you put something in the public domain, it belongs to the public. So if I write a
That's
book,
definitely, yeah.
if you write a book about whatever something specific to you, I write a book about you know Virginia, where I'm from. It once it goes into the public domain, it belongs to the public. And particularly in, like, so for instance, I'm noticing that people in the state of, again, that people taking that Harry Bird statue never mention Ralph Baker or Shock Exchange. Nobody, people didn't know where Prince Edward County, Virginia was. Nobody cared. People in the state of Virginia didn't know where Prince Edward County was. I saw a documentary on didn't
I know
care.
that for a fact.
Anyway, there was a documentary called Amend on it's narrated by Will Smith. It's on Netflix. Pretty good about the 14th Amendment. And
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
they mentioned Prince Edward County in there. A lady named Eiffel. It's Sherilyn Eiffel's sister. I can't think of her name. No, excuse me. It's her name.
Mm,
Her actual name is Sherilyn Eifel. It's Gwen Eiffel's sister. I think she worked for the Legal Defense Fund.
yep,
And she talked about
yep,
Prince
yep.
Edward County, how they closed the schools and blah blah blah. Nobody was ever talking about
Okay.
Prince Edward County, but never mentioned my name or my book ever. And so the bottom line is, once you put something in the public domain, it belongs to the public. Now, do I think it's unethical? Yes, but it's not illegal unless they capture your expression. Now, once Cecily Bowen put her term "trap feminism" in the public domain, legally anybody can use it. It may not be ethical, but people can use it, and and one of the harder things to get people to understand is just not white people stealing from black content creators. There's also black people stealing from black content creators as well. And the game seems to be who gets to the resources first. So if you create something on your YouTube page and I can copy it, I can take it to CNN or to MSNBC or Trevor Noah show, I get credit for it. You follow? So
Right.
it's something that we've been, I wouldn't say frustrated by. We've noticed how we're putting out heat. We're saying things nobody's saying, but next thing you know, it's on somebody repeating what we're saying verbatim. I thought this show would blow up because you have the corporate media will have to recognize what we're doing and have to give us recognition for it. It's not the case. So necessarily the case. So Wednesday night I wrote an article about how Trump would probably be next president and this populist wave going on. Joanne
Mm.
Reid went on the Trevor Noah show on Comedy Central. Same week, repeated the exact same thing, and made it seem like she was the one who was documenting this populist wave, even though she had recently written a book about praising Obama and the Obama administration. But I'm going to share. So you had that thing too, where people watching what other people are doing, authors and content creators are
Right.
doing, and they have much bigger platform. They can take credit for. I'm going to show you. I'm going to try to share my screen about showing Ta-Nehisi Coates, who did an interview with Gail King, and he repeated something
Mm.
kind of came directly from Trump and the G. So I'm going to show the first clip. Has come from Professor Lance Brofman, where he talked about Nathan Bedford Forrest and these statues. He schooled us, a white man schooled a bunch of black people on who Nathan Bedford Forrest was and how he basically started the Ku Klux Klan. And then Coates repeats it almost verbatim on CBS. So I'm going to share my screen. Here goes. No, whether you agree with it or not, if you want to trigger white men down south, go mess with one of those
The whole
statues.
statues issue is in Soviet Union, former Soviet countries, that was a big issue with statues. In fact, Hungary is one of the few places, if you ever went into Hungary, outside of Budapest, 30 miles from Budapest, they have a place called Statues Park. Because in Moat, and if you ever saw in Russia and Poland, had all these statues of Tommy Lenin and Marx, and they're all smashed. And but in Hungary, so let's not do that. Let's take them to a place 30 miles outside of town, put them in one giant enclosure, and build a statues park and charge people $10 to see them. Now, even with the statues, I mean, there's a lot of difference between Robert E. Lee and Nathan Bedford Forrest. And there's still 15 statues of Nathan Bedford Forrest in the South. Nathan Bedford Forrest was like 80 years ahead of his time as far as racism, whereas Robert E. Lee and Jefferson Davis, they just wanted slaves, But Nathan Bedford Forrest was like Hitler. He wanted to kill the black people. And so he not only killed, he also founded the Ku Klux Klan after the war, but not only did he kill a whole bunch of black people, he resulted in the deaths of lots and lots of people, because when the Civil War started, and pretty much all wars at that time, the practice was with prisoners was when each side had a couple of thousand prisoners, they'd exchange it. And that, sort of humane and things like that. Nathan Bedford Forrest, because the Union had black soldiers, he had to execute everyone. He demanded every single one be executed on the spot or something in court. So Lincoln said, if you're going to do that, we're not going to exchange prisoners anymore. Mm-hmm. And so no more prisoner exchanges. Many, many Southerners died in Illinois, where they had a prison. Mm-hmm. And, in Andersonville, in the South, the people who ran that got executed at the end of the war because they had pictures of starving Union prisoners, but it was all because of Nathan Bedford Forrest, and there's still 15 statues of him in the South.
Okay, now I'm going to play, so he basically schooled us on who Nathan Bedford Forrest was. Now I'm going to play a clip from Ta-Nehisi Coates where he's talking about the 1619 Project. And he finds some odd reason to pivot to Nathan Bedford Forrest.
Are dead wrong. I wouldn't, move for schools and for universities to ban a discussion of those ideas. I just think that's a totally different level.
Ta-Nehisi, what do you believe the critics of the 1619 Project are worried about?
Well, I don't want to speak for the critics, because I think that I don't want to, get into a path where, I'm saying that it's wrong to criticize. I mean, I think the critics have and can speak for themselves. I think the people who are attempting to pass policy to banish it out of the public square are simply afraid of a fair and just accounting of American history. We're at a moment right now where people are pulling down statues and monuments and, et cetera. And we're having a much broader reconsideration of what the history of this country is. And there's some hard questions to be asked. Why is it that, for instance, in the state of Tennessee, there are more statues of Nathan Bedford Forrest, one of the founders of the Ku Klux Klan, than all three presidents born in Tennessee put together? How can that be true? What's going on? You know,
Yeah.
and so I think like we're having.
Yeah, and we're having a broader conversation about a bunch of grifters who's stealing other people's content, and it's not just white people. So it's pretty clear. I mean, this guy watches Trump on the GE, and he's lifting content off there, pretending like he doesn't know who we are, and he's taking it to
It's certainly
CBS.
interesting because I don't think I've ever heard him, or I should say, ever read him mention Nathan Bedford Forrest in any of his previous writings. So it's certainly
Right, because he didn't know about it. So you're talking about
right. Like
16. You're
it's
talking about
pretty
the 16.
interesting. Right?
You're talking about the 1619 project and this firestorm over Nicole Hannah Jones, and he finds a reason to pivot to statues.
Nathan
And
Bedford,
so
when even the 1619 project didn't mention Nathan
right,
Bedford Forrest.
right, Professor Brothman, he opened our eyes. And my thing was that the statues. My thing is about in Virginia, it's nuanced. My thing in Virginia is that nobody cares about these statues. They're just trying to use it as a false flag to direct people away from how poor the economy was getting. As the economy turned down, they were looking for a false flag, and that the statue in the state of Virginia, particularly, that myth making and propaganda exists, and those statues are part of the myth making and propaganda. When you take the statues down, you're doing erasing history, but the myth making and propaganda doesn't go away. There's still people who have the mentality of a Harry Bird who think that they can go through a black neighborhood and take whatever they want. And the person I was telling you about earlier who wrote a story about my black high school, she's gifted and she's a great writer. It's all myth making and propaganda. The myth making and propaganda doesn't go away just because you move the statues. All you're doing is erasing history. And that's the
Right.
point I was making. But the other broader point is that you have a bunch of grifters, black and white, who are basically taking people's content and trying to commodify it. And it's unethical, but it's not necessarily illegal unless you capture the person's expression. And we don't necessarily have this platform. It's not necessarily copyrighted material when you on a podcast, saying stuff. You know what I'm saying? So it's unethical, but it may not necessarily be legal unless you have it copyrighted. You follow what I'm saying? So once we put this out in the public domain,
Right.
it belongs to the public.
That's a very that, like you said, what's legal versus what's ethical, and I think that's a perfect summation of that argument.
But sorry, before you go on, is that okay? So another thing is you can't call out Jennifer Buck and then turn around and praise John Doe or Joe, like for instance, Ta-Nehisi Coates, who says things that black folks already believe about how great the Democratic Party is, how great Obama is, and we need to support black women, no matter what that question is. The answer is always we need to support black women. You can't call out Jennifer Buck and then give these Coates or his cohorts, who black folks like, who they repeat, so black folks already believe. You can't give them a pass. You can't have it both ways.
100%.
You can't have it both ways.
Right. It has to cut both ways if we're remaining objective, and if the goal is truth and accuracy. And I think that's one thing that at least those of us that have an interest in history and we began to go beyond our own beliefs and even oral histories about what we've been told about history and began to actually dig, right, and do the actual research. And you will often find that what you previously held beliefs will end up getting overturned, right? And sometimes that could be an emotional toll, right? Like, oh my God, like, I can't believe this thing has been happening, or I can't believe that I believe this particular perspective or lens for a third or half of all my life, and I'm looking at the fact that kind of says otherwise and forces a reshaping. So in other words, I think if we kept our ultimately our minds open, we would be very slow to celebritize folks. And I think that that's a lot of the problem, is that chefs have been celebritized, authors have been celebritized, journalists have been celebritized. And what it's allowed folks to do is to go unchecked, right? Is to go unscathed because they're likable, because they have repeated popular talking points that has garnered a certain amount of eyeballs and has allowed folks to make some money as well. So let's call that piece what it is. That they've allowed their celebrity to be monetized even for others. So what is the incentivization to, as we say today, stop the bag, right? Like if you or fumble the bag, like you get into the bag and you fumble in the bag. That's why so many. I think as of late, there are so many kind of surprises. Like, oh my God, I can't believe this person was this. With these different documentaries,
Right.
exposés on singers, on artists, etc. This was the Epstein Chronicles, right? This is, they now have a documentary on Hugh Hefner, and so many folks are in shock, like, oh my God, there was so much sexual assault and harassment. Really? Like a guy who ran, like, really? That's a surprise. Okay, like it's like so even when it should be obvious, in other words, but because folks have been celebritized to such a high degree that they can go unscathed, right? I mean, you got an alleged, pedophile walking around the Upper East Side today that Hollywood runs to. Anytime, like we watched, Will Smith slap Chris Rock and get 10 years booted out, but Roman Polanski can rape someone, evade a child. Let's be very clear, not someone, rape a child, evade the law, and Hollywood goes to him. The man has got a Lifetime Achievement Award and Oscars and have several Hollywood actors and actresses vying to be in a Roman Polanski film, vying to be in a Woody Allen film, and this is the double standard. They're living, breathing, going grocery shopping, buying gas, going on vacations. So in other words, to the point that we as a public, folks have done that. So there's a deep lack of accountability, in other words. And even the accountability that does happen, and that's the other side, when we see marginalized folks, and, again, I've only been black all my life, so I can only speak from that lens. I can't speak to other communities and the way that they have handled intra-community issues. But when it comes to the black community, do we have folks that have committed crimes, have been wrong? 100%. However, have we noticed a pattern of when those wrongs have been spotlighted by the law? Is it a very different outcome than non-black counterparts? That's also true. So two
Right.
things can be true simultaneously, and that kind of speaks to my earlier point of the effects of colonization.
Right.
That
Right.
what is
Right.
it, what does it mean to take from a marginalized group, historically marginalized group, when that group in a lot of ways continues to remain marginalized? What is the
Right.
accountability even look like for this woman? Yes, her book has been pulled. Great. Has this other woman's profile been raised? Has that led to other publishing houses willing to give the eyeballs and attention and resources to the woman who coined the phrase in the first place? We
Cecily
saw
Bowen.
this even with,
Cecily Bowen.
right. Exactly. So it's like, we even watched this with Me Too. How many folks thought Alyssa Milano and the other young white woman uh, created Me Too? Like,
Right.
to
Right.
the
Right.
point that she had to explicitly state, "I'm not the creator of Me Too." Like, I jumped on the bandwagon. I saw it on Twitter. I thought it meant this, and that's when I began to,
Right.
engage in the advocacy. I forget the white actress's name, but
Only one,
Tarana Burke.
only other person I remember was Uma Thurman. She was real vocal. This lady named was the name of Rose. The other lady that
Rose
you
McGowan.
right,
That's it. Yeah. So Tarana Burke was largely stepped on and stepped out and completely forgotten. She had came up with the Me Too movement years prior, right?
right,
So it's not as if we don't have historical examples, both contemporarily and historically, to show that there is an uneven level of accountability. If there were kind of a just or equitable rationing of accountability, I think this conversation would be less racialized,
right,
right?
right,
Like in other
right,
words, we could have a more objective conversation and not have to, as some call, pull out the race card. Like we would
right.
be able to keep that card on the table.
Right. But
In
I
other
think Tawana
words,
Burke is a good example. Tawana Burke was in an interesting position because she was happy that Me Too movement was gaining traction, but she didn't want to be the one to
right.
say I started it. But there are a lot of black women who were saying, "Don't forget about Tawana Burke," and then she finally got her recognition. But my only point is that when you're marginalized, you also have black people who can also prey on you as well, and those situations are maybe a little more difficult to detect because basically you're taking concept or something created by a marginalized community, and who can get to the bag faster, who can get to the resources faster. That's sort of that game. But it also, I think, the internet because of the rise of the internet, I think you're having more of these instances happening, particularly when it comes to content. And I remember, I think the site was called Concrete Loop. It was I don't know if you remember, it was like a celebrity gossip site.
No.
It was much bigger. That's why it got put out of business. But I remember when I first noticed it, it was the lady was talking about celebrity gossip and all these pictures, and um, people. She was complaining about people were stealing her content. That she had to pay for the pictures. She got pictures from
Mm,
celebrities. She had to pay for the pictures. There were other celebrity gossip sites all of a sudden was cropping up, and they were like copying what she was saying, not necessarily verbatim, but because of the internet, you can have someone watching your blog and repeat the exact same thing on another blog. It can take you years before you even realize what they're doing it, or
right.
whether it's a YouTube channel. When you put content out there, it can be commodified a lot faster. And I think people stealing whole sections of people's content, whether it's whether it's videos or in writing, whether your blog or what have you. I think the internet has made it a lot easier and made it a lot people can sort of copy your content a lot faster. As far as what Jennifer Buckets, I think they're doing it on a much larger scale before you even get the copyrighted material, and it's creating like it's a cost to society, especially when you're creating this content. You don't have it copyrighted. If somebody does it enough, that's when you can maybe notice it. But I think that's where we're going in terms of this scourge on society of people constantly stealing people's content and running around masquerading like they're somebody else. I think the internet has made it faster for these sort of talented Mr. Ripleys to evolve
mm.
or to
That's
arise.
that's a perfect analogy, man. Yeah, the talented Mr. Ripley, man. That was such a good film too. But to me, I think it's even more. Frankly, I just find it even more egregious. One of the spaces where we see that level of kind of black on black, so to speak, exploitation is obviously the music and entertainment industry. One of the things that highlighted more recently for me was the documentary, which I believe Reginald Hudlin was the director. Correct me if I'm wrong, but of The Godfather, um, Mr. Avant,
The Black Godfather.
the Black Godfather.
I
And
like that. I
rest in
like that.
peace rest in peace to his wife. They actually just convicted, I believe, her her murderer
Hmm.
as well. That was just such a tragedy.
I guess he wasn't hard to find. He was the one with the limp because he shot himself in the foot.
Exactly. But for me, I'm gonna have to ding the brother. I don't know if if it's gonna reach him or not, but I'm gonna have to ding the brother. is Puffy. Because, I think the only person that has not come out and talked about how exploitive the contracts were is Biggie, and we all know why he didn't come out. Unfortunately, his time was cut short. So we don't know if that conversation would have ever come out of his mouth, maybe years later. But practically every artist that has come from under the Bad Boy label has not reaped a similar reward. That has been the biggest criticism of his artists and former artists that have come out from under him. But watching the Black Godfather, realizing what Clarence Avant did in terms of setting a structure, giving these guys the inside information, and literally mentoring them, giving them the game for them to in turn go out and do the same. It's kind of the original model that W.B. Du Bois had in mind with the Talented Tenth. That the kind of latter part that people forget is once you are in a place of opportunity and access, you're supposed to open the door
Right.
for other black folks like you to then get in similar spaces. That talented 10th was supposed to open up the door to the next 10th, and
Right.
so on and so forth. And in other words, we watched that. For me, the Black Godfather was an example of where you had an individual that's opening the door to and nearly every person. If you haven't watched it, for those viewers, I highly recommend it. It's a great documentary, even from a historic music history lens. Um, but Clarence Avant was extremely influential. Every artist that got on there talked about how if it wasn't for him, they would not even have the opportunities to even create their own deals. That
Right.
he literally laid the game for the business side of music for them, or they would have suffered the same fate as so many other artists that didn't
Right.
heed his advice in the first place. So to hear that and to watch same brother that I got a ding, Puffy, several times throughout that documentary, give his praises and his respect and his allegiance to Clarence for that very thing, and yet where is Puffy's Puffy? Right? Like where is his kind of cohort of artists
Right. Right. Right.
that would
Right.
say the same things about Puffy that
Right.
Puffy had to say about Clarence Avant? And that's
Right. Right.
the
Right.
like
Right.
that's to me the thing that's even more egregious, that when you come out of a community that has been historically stepped on by so many folks outside of that community, who needs enemies when you got folks that's coming internally gonna step on my head just the same? And to
Mm.
me, that's even worse, because if somebody's coming in a white hood and and a white bed sheet, it's clear who my enemy is. I
Right. Right.
actually have more respect for that
I
because
got you.
I know where that person stands versus the one that's standing next to me, patting me on my back, attempting to befriend me like you're one of me, and you're simply looking to be opportunistic and step on me the same way that my enemy is. So I have less patience for folks that come from within the community and commit the same acts as those outside of the community. To me, it's even more egregious, and I just have less patience for that.
Interesting. Did you hear the same? You hear these similar stories, like when you're a kid, like you just want to believe in fairy tales. But I remember Houdini was one of my favorite rap groups. Next thing you know, they stopped making music.
Mm.
You can't figure out why. A lot of these
Yeah,
people
yeah.
just stop. All of a sudden, they just disappear. A lot of these artists, they're hot, then they disappear, and you can't figure out why. They all had similar stories, like Mace. He had a bad contract. He wasn't making any money, so he stopped making music. Then you have like Houdini. When you hear that story, they weren't getting paid.
I, almost every artist,
They
Tribe
weren't
Called
getting paid.
Quest,
Right. They weren't.
TLC.
Right.
some of the largest groups on the planet at the time, and you're like, you were making what? I'll never forget that interview that Q-Tip said that they made like their largest contract, they made like 13 grand a piece.
Mm-hmm.
And there wasn't an album that they put out that wasn't platinum. And you're
Right.
like, huh?
Yeah, even
How is this?
Bobby Brown said when he left, you can why would Bobby Brown leave New Edition? He said when I left New Edition, I got $35,000 on VCR. Like
Yeah,
Why
it's
Bobby had to do that to New Edition? You know, you all like upset he left and so on and so forth. But they all have similar stories. They had signed a bad contract. But now think of it from my perspective. I own my own intellectual property, and then so you have hip hop artists own their own intellectual property. It's the biggest thing in the world. They get all publicity, but there's other black authors people know about. I'm the only one who own. I'm not signed to one of these big publishing houses. I own my own intellectual property. You think you got the game beat? Somebody comes along and writes something similar to what you wrote and calls it research.
right.
Still gets where it gets. I'm not signed to a bad contract, but
Right,
someone still can commodify your intellectual property without necessarily making it copyright infringement or what have you. If they can write
Yep.
something similar,
Yep.
but your stuff is in the public domain, they can write something similar and never quote, never what's the word I'm looking for? Never cite you or nothing.
Exactly. And that was the issue even with Jennifer Buck, is that Cicely Bowen knew because she was a footnote. Never cited Bowen, but was a footnote in the within the book. So that tells, like, that already lets you know that this action was intentional to a large degree.
Right.
That you had your eyeballs on this person's work, on their intellectual property, and yet you still move forward in a way that exploits that person.
Right. So
Without
you right.
giving them their proper credit, at least.
Right. So you're trying
Yeah.
to basically erase Cecily Bourne from our own history.
Right.
Because for instance, my book had like a 20-page bibliography, and it was really my intention was it's a more celebration of whether you're talking about economics or finance or Virginia history to hopefully encourage people to go back and quote all these people in terms of if I couldn't write something that similar to this, I'll capture an expression. I cited it. There's no way somebody would believe some of the stuff I was writing. That's, you know what I'm saying? 'Cause I don't have that. I'm not a historian.
Right.
So to try to encourage people to go back and read those books. I wasn't trying to erase them from their own history and try to make it seem like I'm doing all this stuff. It's silly.
Right.
It's silly. And so,
Right.
basically, it's a way of erasing people from their own history. And some people call that the scholarship or the politics of scholarship. Where I can write something similar to you, and like I don't know who you are, but clearly you do know who that other person is. I know exactly who you are, but I'm pretending like I don't. That's a politics of scholarship. It's unethical, but and so she, that's what they're calling her out about. But are you trying to celebrate trap feminism, or are you trying to erase these people from their own history? And the way to do that is to write something similar, and then don't cite them or don't quote them or what have you. And so again, that's the way of getting around. You think you get the game on lock, people can turn around and then write something similar. Your best hope as an artist to make sure that, if black people really, really like it, you got to promote it. I'm saying when Cecily Bourne came out with her book, if you really like her book, you got to really buy it. You got to promote it. That way, it makes it difficult for someone to erase this person.
Right. To take without citing, without giving acknowledgement, and certainly be harder, even if they did do that, to certainly get away with it.
Right. We tend to African Americans tend not to promote something nuanced. It's usually something really goofy and over the top. You know what I'm saying? But
man.
but anyway, so at least from this perspective, again, the law says once something goes in the public domain, it belongs to the public. At what point do you capture someone's expression? As long as you're not necessarily capturing the expression of writing things, copying things verbatim, or trying to say things exactly like they're saying, and that's not what Cecily Bourne is saying. She's saying she's basically coined a phrase and she's writing something similar, but she's not capturing her expression. Once you start capturing a person's expression, then you get into copyright infringement laws.
Yeah, I mean, trying to, write like Langston Hughes or Toni Morrison,
Right.
or sing like Nina Simone.
And that, and
that's
that was
when that's,
that was one of
that's
the
when
things.
it gets goofy.
That was one of the things Little Richard was complaining about Elvis. Like, not only is he singing, trying to sing on us, he's doing his leg movement, trying to dance like us and copy my
Right,
style.
right.
That was one of Little Richard's biggest complaints. But so that's basically it on my end. I mean, you have any last parting shots as far as
Now, I mean, one, I'm actually glad to see that, Cicely Bowen was able to uh, get some sort of recourse. I have no idea what if that ended up in some type of monetary recourse beyond the public backlash. But glad to see that her work has been acknowledged, and that essentially the book was pulled. But I guess we have yet to really see what kind of not necessarily a banned book, but in a lot of ways a banned book, right? Sometimes that fear of missing out, right, provides an opportunity to sell later. The thing that you can't get your hands on, the thing that's hard to find, can naturally increase its intrinsic value. Excuse me, within the public domain. So I guess we'll have to wait and see what that results in. But ultimately, I guess the hope is that at least Bowen's books are have shot up in interest and in sales as well. But to the greater argument of intellectual property and not just the what do they say, the modeling of folks' intellectual property, which I think is a roundabout way of saying stealing, frankly. We'll just model after what's been done. Marketers get into that gray area a lot. What's the difference between the inspiration and just all out copyright theft, right, or
right.
all out plagiarism? Because something can be, at least from my lens, something can be written in a voice of someone, even if it's not written by that person. And the evidence to that are songwriters. Songwriters will write a song intended for a specific artist, and they will tend to write in that person's singing style to tailor it for that specific artist. The difference is, they're giving, they're hoping to negotiate a deal with that specific artist as opposed to putting it out as their own,
Mm-hmm.
right? And even when they do put it out as their own, there is a recourse because folks will hear it. We hear that in music quite often. Even the argument with the singer Avant. I don't know if folks remember Avant. At this point, I guess I can say back in the day. It doesn't feel like back in the day, but it was like early 2000s. But it still feels like just a couple years ago. But Avant and even Trey Songz, that they sang like R. Kelly,
Right.
and you knew that this was an R. Kelly either written song or R. Kelly inspired song because the sound of
Right.
the song,
Right.
this
Right.
sounded like R. Kelly, although R. Kelly may not have written it,
Right.
and R. Kelly may not have produced it, and R. Kelly didn't get the credit, but this sound like R. Kelly, and
Mm.
so in other words, we have examples of folks that have modeled their particular outlet after other artists, and not giving the original content creator their due, by way of monetary value, by way of public recognition and acknowledgement, or citation. So we have examples of that in the public sphere, and the law, um, hope hopefully will make a lot of those distinctions when it comes to intellectual property and copyright infringement even more clear. Um, so that way the broader argument can become less of an argument,
Right,
frankly.
right.
At
But I
least
think,
be less of a conversation, frankly,
right.
and some clear lines.
But I think this is gonna, I wouldn't say the tip of the iceberg, but it's gonna continue. If you're not putting out content that people want to steal, then you're not really doing your job. And once
That's
you
the
put
way
it
of
in
looking
public,
at it.
once you put it in public domain, they will steal it. Once you put it in public domain, it belongs to the public. But it is creating a cost because people just putting out. People should be you shouldn't be allowed to. And it gets into two different categories. Do you make a Jennifer Buck famous, or do you just kind of like be silent about it? Because sometimes you can have the opposite effect where you're actually helping this person make money and you become
Right,
become
right.
a trending topic. But it gets into I know Obama's talking about disinformation, but I think this also kind of fits in the area of disinformation where people putting out wrong information, and you have
Mm,
imposters making you thinking that information they're putting out is coming from them.
mm.
That they're basically
Yep.
trying to make it seem like this is my content, and we have to. I think as all content creators, whether YouTube or you have a blog or what have you, an author, whether it's copyright or not, you have to be vigilant, not just for Jennifer Buck, but also for the black people who are doing it as well. So I would encourage those
Correct.
people who created Firestorm over Jennifer Buck to also be vigilant over people who are stealing other people's content, stealing other people's identity, even if they do say things that you like to hear, that you like this person personally. So
Right.
that's Trump and the GE. Gets bad and bougie. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you in a couple weeks. Thank you.